Edward is a blue tender engine who lives on Soda. He works on the line between Wellsworth and Brendam Harbor. The clay pits are farther down the line from the harbor, and he often sees Bill and Ben pulling cars of China clay back and forth. But Edward is getting old, and sometimes he clanks as his cars become loose and rattle. One day, he clunked into the harbor to collect some freight tires. Bill and Ben were shunting in the yard and noticed the sound. "Do you hear that, Bill?" asked Ben. "It sounds like clanking," replied Bill. "I wonder what it could be," pondered Ben. "Possibly some old iron," started Bill. "That's enough out of you two," said Boko sternly. "Now run along to the clay pits. You still have work to do." Edward sighed heavily as Bill and Ben scurried off to the clay pits. "What's the matter? It's not like you to sit back and take their teasing," said Boko. "I just wonder sometimes why Sir Topham Hatt keeps me around. I'm old and I'm in the works so often to get mended," he said sadly. "You might not be quite as young and sprightly as you used to be, but you do have a lot of experience, and your kindness spreads to all the engines who see you. But I can't do that if I break down and can't be repaired," he sighed. The conductor blew his whistle, and Edward chuffed sadly away. Boko wanted to cheer Edward up, but he didn't know how. Edward arrived at the yard and shunted his coaches together. He clanked about the yard as he did so. Percy and Duck were concerned for him. Edward waited patiently at the platform for his passengers to arrive. They got in, and the porter shut the doors. The conductor blew his whistle, and Edward set off down the line. He clanked loudly as he puffed along. The passengers also became concerned. Thomas and James took the rest of the passengers home, and Edward returned to the sheds very tired. He didn't even say goodnight, and fell asleep as soon as he stopped moving. The next day, Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. "Some of your passengers are concerned about you, so I'm having Percy take your passenger trains today. But that will mean you'll have to take longer freight trains. Do you think you can handle it?" "I'll give it my best shot," said Edward. First, he shunted coaches for Percy's train. Then he marshaled his own train together and set off down the line. Edward did his best, but he clanked more and more. Then the clanks turned into wheezes and strains. "You should go easier," said Edward's driver. But Edward was too busy focusing on pulling his train to listen. When they reached the harbor, even Bill and Ben were concerned about Edward. "Would you like us to do your work, and you can take cars to and from the clay pits?" they asked thoughtfully. "No thanks, I can manage," said Edward, and he clunked away to collect his next train. All day, the other engines noticed his wheezing and clanking louder than ever, and they were all concerned for Edward. That night at the sheds, the engines held a meeting. "It's clear Edward is running himself into the ground," said Henry. "So then what could we do to help him out?" asked Gordon. "Percy and I can shun his trains for him before he leaves," said Thomas. "That's good," said Toby. "Sir Topham Hatt is having me take a train to the harbor tomorrow. I can take some of Edward's cars with me so he has less to pull," put in James. "I'll ask Donald and Douglas if one of them can go and help him out on the Brendam line. Oliver and I can easily cover their work if need be," said Duck. "Okay then, that's settled," said Gordon. "James, Duck, Percy, and Thomas, we'll leave it to you." The next morning, Edward chuffed heavily out of the harbor and up to the station dock. When he arrived, he found his train was already shunted together. He looked around the yard, but no one was to be found. "I don't have to shunt my train. How nice," he said. Percy watched quietly from the shed as Edward chuffed down the line with his cars. While Edward was waiting at the station, he heard a familiar low-toned whistle. Just then, Douglas pulled alongside him. "Hello, Edward. I heard you needed some help." "Dinna fash yourself. I'll take the next train," said Douglas as he shunted the rest of Edward's cars together. "Thank you, Douglas," replied Edward as the Scottish twin pulled swiftly out of the yard. Without a train to take, Edward began organizing the remaining cars for other trains. Then there was trouble. "Edward," called the yard manager, There's been a mistake. A train was supposed to leave an hour ago, but no engine came to take it. You have another train scheduled at the same time, so you'll need to take both." "Oh dear," sighed Edward. "And here are all the engines helping me, and I still have to take a heavy train. I guess it can't be helped." Boko pointed to the yard as Edward counted the other half. "I'm really sorry you have to take this long train all by yourself," said Boko. "It has to be done." "I'll do my best to get it back to the station," said Edward determinedly. The conductor blew his whistle, and Edward jumped heavily out of the yard. The cars clanked and clattered behind Edward, who himself was clunking just as loud. Once he hit the open line, he began to struggle. The heavy cars seemed to grow heavier every second. Edward began to slow down. "You can do it, Edward," called his crew. Edward's fire flared and his wheels slipped loudly before gripping the rails again. Come on," said Edward. As he reached the bridge, the hill started. Edward was in for a tough time. He was clanking louder than ever, and his wheels slipped even more, but he didn't give up. He struggled on, inch after inch, meter after meter. When he finally reached the yard, all the engines cheered as he made it to the station. They whistled loudly as Edward stopped at the platform, battered, weary, but unbeaten. Sir Topham Hatt was very pleased with his work. "Well done, Edward. Even when you were on the verge of a breakdown, you still pulled through for everyone," congratulated Sir Topham Hatt. "Thank you, sir," sighed Edward. "And I've been thinking about this for a while, but now I've made up my mind. I'm going to send you to Crewe, and you'll be overhauled and run better than ever." "Oh, thank you, sir," whistled Edward excitedly. "Three cheers for Edward the hero," shouted Henry, and everyone clapped and whistled. Edward could do nothing but smile. After he returned from Crewe, Edward was stronger, faster, and better than ever. The engines were glad to have him home, and his passengers were happy to see him well again. Edward now works harder than ever, and he doesn't clank, even a bit.